thank you, Jackie, and I promise I won't sing. But what I do want to do to first get started is thank all of you for your dedication, for making it through to the very last session. And if it's not dedication, but just the fact you couldn't get a flight any time sooner than this, then you have my sympathies. But either way, in order to reward you for being here, I am not going to use the entire time. I will try to keep it a little on the shorter side, knowing you've heard quite a number of presentations over the last 3 days. As Jackie said, my topic is how to position your market research team to wield influence. And she did give you some of my background. My entire career has been spent on the TV side of the media business. Some of it, in fact, most of it has been on the research side. I've been head of research for Universal Studios, head of research for Aaron Spelling Entertainment. But then I've also had the opportunity to go on the other side of the businesses. So at Lifetime Cable Network, I did scheduling. At Verizon Entertainment, I did program acquisitions. For Country Music Television, I did a lot of program scheduling as well. And what that's really helped me do is be on the other side of the equation, so to speak. See what it was like getting research from another research team and seeing what I thought they were doing right, what I thought they could have done better to service my departments, so that now that I'm back in research, hopefully maintain some of those thoughts and remember, oh, when I was on this side of the desk, I liked it better when people approached me this way. Since I first started in the business, things started getting a bit more complicated. This is a slide that Nielsen recently put together. I started in the mid-'70s in the business, and I was on the TV station side. And back then, as you could see right after 1975, the biggest thing we were worried about were VCRs, and what was that going to do to our ratings, and potentially how would it affect how we were pricing our advertising. A little bit later came cable, which became a very big concern for us, satellite, and then the internet, starting with AOL. And then it was smooth sailing for about 10 years, and then all of a sudden, with broadband came Google, Yahoo, HD, DVD, DVRs, and as you can see, in the past 15 years, my business has gotten so much more complicated than it was the 30 years preceding it. However, that in a way is an advantage to me. Now I'm with Discovery Communications, and the advantage is because it's so complicated, they need people like myself to help them sort out the complications and make their way through all these different platforms and to better understand how they deal with the challenges that they're facing. And as Jackie mentioned, I oversee research for three of our specific networks. We have two smaller ones, which is Destination America, which is focused on paranormal programming, American Heroes Channel, which is formerly the Military Channel, but our largest one is Investigation Discovery. And Investigation Discovery is where I spend the majority of my time because it's the #1 ad-supported cable network for persons 25 to 54 and women 25 to 54, Monday through Sunday, 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. So let me just ask, show of hands, how many of you out there are familiar with Investigation Discovery? Okay, that's about half of you. And I'm not surprised that there's at least half of you that aren't familiar with it, because one of the challenges Investigation Discovery had is we have gotten to be #1 because our viewers spend so much time with us, despite the fact that we don't have as broad a reach as some of the other networks that are out there. But before I talk more about that, what I wanted to do, for those of you not familiar with us, is just play a brief clip so that you have a better idea of what Investigation Discovery is.
This is the night he's going to kill me.
She was scared about the one she met online.
This ripped out part of my soul.
This story had everything. Love affairs, jealousy, murder.
This is steamy, nasty, dirty stuff.
A woman scorned for love? Watch out.
One thing was certain, he was going to do this again.
You know, when you shoot people, you gotta make sure they're dead.
So there you have it. That's investigation discovery. And for, hold on, just trying to get it off the screen here. Yeah, Marco, I'm not sure why it's not going off here. There you go. Okay. Great. Thank you. Let's just go back to where we were. Okay. So the thing about investigation discovery, as you can see, it's not everyone's cup of tea. For some people, they are not into nonfiction crime programming. It's a little too intense. But for our viewers who do watch us, they are fanatical about us. In fact, for ID, our viewers watch for longer periods of time than viewers to any other network. And by that I mean from the time they tune the channel on till they either switch channels or turn the television off. On average, those periods of time are larger than the amount of time average spent on any of the broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, Fox, NBC. Also, it's longer than any of the premium cable networks see, HBO, Showtime, and Starz. And certainly any more than our competition on the ad-supported cable side, whether it's USA, Fox, HGTV, ESPN, any of those. So I bring up ID's position in television, not so much as a shameless plug for my company, although I'm always happy to do that on our behalf, but more so to use it as a metaphor for the topic we're talking about today. And that's because I think in a number of ways, investigation discovery is a lot like good market research people, because we're often analytical in nature, and because we're not frequently type A personalities, our value can also suffer from a lack of awareness. We might find that we too get a very strong support from the people who know what we do, but often there's not enough people who know about the good work we're doing. And in fact, oftentimes those people are the key decision makers and the ones who would get the most value out of what we do. So that's the main focus of what I want to touch on, namely how to raise the internal profile of your market research team so that the key company decision makers are aware of what's going on. Or for those of you who might have seen the musical Hamilton, and you know the big song from Hamilton, I Want to Be in the Room Where It Happens, this really kind of sums up what the theme of what I'm looking at today, because in the musical Hamilton, it's about Aaron Burr feeling as if only people would hear him and listen to him and know all the great things he's capable of doing, he might be able to have a much better position than what he has. And I think we all often feel that way in terms of getting the recognition we want and getting people to pay attention to what we've spent a lot of time on. So how do we go about raising that profile for our teams? For a network like Investigation Discovery, it's very easy for us. We just spend money on advertising and promote the hell out of what we're trying to do. Not something you can do with your market research teams. But what you can do, and what is one of the best forms of advertising, whether it's for a product or a service, is word of mouth advertising. And by being able to generate strong word of mouth within your organizations, you can build up the profile of your market research team. And what I've outlined today are 4 steps that I think I've used in the past that have been effective for me and that I wanted to pass along. Those 4 are: first, develop the role of collaborator; second, provide a great customer experience; third, anticipate customer needs; and finally, see the big picture. So let's start with the first one, develop the role of collaborator. In doing that, it's very important to understand what role your team is playing and also how that role is being perceived. In market research, you can find yourself in one of possibly several different roles. I've come across a few over my different positions, and one of them I call the service provider. And in this particular case, it's a very passive role. In other words, you wait for your clients to come to you, tell you what their issues are, what their questions are. You take those questions, you provide them with data, and in return, you hand it back to them and say, okay, I think I've addressed your question. And what you normally find is when you're in that kind of a passive role, the response you wind up getting is from your client, whether it's an internal or an external client, is what I call a grab-and-go mentality. So you've put a lot of time into assembling a lot of data, whether it's a bunch of spreadsheets or it's a PowerPoint or some other kind of presentation, and the person on the other end will just say to you, let me have the information, I'll read it over, and if I have any questions, I'll come back to you. And I think a lot of you know from experience, if you've had that happen, very seldom do they ever come back to you with questions. They read it, they kind of think they've gotten it all. But unfortunately, what happens is, without having that communication back and forth, and with that grab-and-go mentality, what is missing is you being able to provide any of your insights that you were able to gather while putting together all of this information. And in addition, you don't get the opportunity to then pass along recommendations to them on what you think would be most beneficial to them based on what you've learned by assembling all this information. The second role is what I call adversarial. In this, we run into this oftentimes on the television side. A lot of the research I do it in conjunction with producers. We have producers within our company. We also use external producers. And a lot of them will always feel as if they have years of experience, and the best way for them to determine if a show is working or not is what they'll say is my gut instinct. And they want to rely so much on their gut. And what they don't want to hear is the collective response of a bunch of people coming out of focus groups. As a result, they see research strictly as something that can only slow the process down and possibly say negative things about this show that they've been working weeks and possibly months on. So when they see us coming, they turn and go in the opposite direction. We sometimes contribute to that adversarial relationship when we fail to appreciate the impact of what our research is going to do on their specific work. So it's through the third role of collaborator that is where we can create a win-win relationship between us and the client. So in this last picture I have there, you see a nice picture of a dog holding a bottle of milk for a little lamb. Just to say, working together, you can develop a win-win relationship. And so establishing one is requires working on the great customer experience that I was talking about earlier. Part of that is building trust and I'm sorry, let me just go back a step. I left out one thing I wanted to mention, which is working as a collaborator. It's important to build trust so that if I'm working with a producer, he has to know that as I get my data in, I will share it with him before I bring it out to a larger audience and expose any of the pitfalls in a program that might not be working to a larger crowd. This way, it gives him the opportunity to know exactly how to respond and, in anticipation, be able to prepare how am I going to fix the show before a larger group of internal people know about it. I also need to remember when I'm presenting this material to a larger group to be very diplomatic about it. I may hear in a focus group that within our shows we do a lot of recreations. And oftentimes, the phrase I hear most often are respondents saying, I thought those recreations were cheesy. Now, I can say to the producer, yeah, a lot of the people thought your recreations were cheesy, but he's going to get very defensive with that and push back and may not listen to what I'm saying. Instead, I will try to put it into a more positive light and say, you know, some of the recreations you've done in earlier shows have been so good and so strong. From what we heard from the people in the focus groups and when we did our questionnaires was that these did not live up to the same standards some of your earlier shows have said. So I'm letting them know in both cases that the recreations aren't as good as they could be and need improving, but I've said it in a way that hopefully he'll be a little bit more receptive to the message and take it to heart as opposed to being more on the defensive about it. Okay, so on to the second point, provide a great customer experience. Towards that, I've noted a number of ways of trying to provide a great customer experience. First is be approachable. I have to ask myself sometimes, do I make my clients feel like I'm too busy for their questions? Does it seem like every time they go past my office, there's piles of paper all over, piles of paper on the floor? When they come to the door, do I seem annoyed that they're interrupting me? Or do I try to periodically get out of my office, walk around, talk to my internal clients, find out what's going on with them so that they know they can approach me? Or if it's an external client, pick up the phone, find out what's going on with them, what's on their mind, so that we can develop that communication so that they can approach me with things they've been thinking of, but because they thought maybe I was too busy, we're holding back. Secondly, understand your customer needs. When researching when receiving a research request, how deeply do you dig into it? Do you take it on face value for what your client is telling you, or do you try to dig into it more to really understand what the end goal is? I've often had someone come to me and ask about a particular issue, only to ask more and more questions and realize that the issue that they brought to me is not really the issue that they're dealing with. But by digging into it and peeling back the proverbial onion, I've been able to really understand that there might be a deeper question at hand that needs to be addressed. Next, communicate timetables. I try to reinforce this a lot with my staff. Before you leave a meeting with someone, find out when they need it. And don't use the phrase ASAP. Either from you, don't say to them, I'll get it to you ASAP, or don't have them tell you, I need it ASAP. Both sides need to be very definitive about when they can get it done and when it's needed by. Next, keep the customer apprised. As you assemble your research, check in periodically. First off, it helps your client feel as if everything is on schedule because you haven't forgotten about what they've come to you for and that you obviously are working on it. And at that point, you could also reiterate the timetable. It also, as I've found, sometimes in checking in with clients, I find the issue has changed. And either what we were talking about before, there's some slight adjustments that I need to be aware of, or all of a sudden, they don't have a need for this anymore. So at a minimum, checking in periodically can save you some time. At a maximum, it can save you from appearing on investigation discovery because you beat the client silly because they never told you to stop working on that project. Next, set expectations. For example, does the client's deadline limit the depth to which you can explore the limit? If they need something in a day or 2 days, you need to let them know, I can only go so far with that kind of turnaround time. Does the type of research they're requiring exceed the available budget that you might have at that point? We are getting to the end of the year. Budgets are are starting to run out. If I have someone come to me and say, I need to test this program, I may say, I only have this much left in the budget. I can maybe do some quantitative or small qualitative, but I can't do our normal level of program testing for you in this particular case. Also, what level of precision and specificity can the client expect? Depending on what the issue is, there may not be the same kind of data available. We're getting into a lot of things now with certain platforms that Nielsen and other measurement companies have not yet developed the means to be able to extract a lot of user behavior. Because of that, when someone comes to me with something about some of these newer platforms, I have to let them know up front what the limitations are. So this way they can either say, yes, I'll take whatever you can give me, or you know what, that's not going to get me what I need. Don't bother putting it together. As a result, I'll try to find another way of getting to this if it means doing some creative consumer research as opposed to using standard secondary research. And lastly, looks matter. Today we actually heard quite a number of presentations on presentations, which was great to hear. Not everyone digests data in the same way. A lot of us in this room love spreadsheets. I do everything in spreadsheets. Grocery list I'll put in spreadsheets. Anything I can do I'll put into a spreadsheet. My wife will not look at any spreadsheet I put together, no matter how much I try to organize her life. Some people are good with them, others aren't. So what's important is for your particular client to understand what is the best method of communicating your research to them. And when it comes to visual design, if you're not good at it, one of the things I've been doing here is taking a lot of notes on people's presentations and saying, oh, I like that. I'm going to do that in my next presentation. Oh, I like that. I'm going to do that. So nothing wrong with stealing someone's design ideas to help make your presentations look a little bit more interesting. So the third part of those 4 steps, anticipate customer needs. I had a boss once tell me the first day on my job is that your job is to make me look good. And I laughed when he said it because I thought he was not being serious, and he said, no, I'm serious. That is your job, is to make me look good. And I think in a way that's what all of our clients want our research to do, is to make them look good. Now, we can't slant our research just to make it look favorable to help our marketing department or help our communications department. But what we can do is at least anticipate what our clients are going to need before they realize it, and more importantly, before their own boss realizes it. So how do you do that? How do you anticipate what your customer is going to need? I try to get around and talk to various department heads and just ask them simple questions like, what's your biggest challenges right now? What's on your mind? What are the big issues you're dealing with? What's keeping you up at night? And by collecting those things, I'll talk to my staff about it, and we will then try to collect information and do our own research on this. Even though no one's come to us and asked us, we will then try to answer those questions and then go back to those particular people and say, oh, you were talking about such and such, here's the information. So this way, if you do that enough time with these people, they will look for more opportunities to work with you because you're helping them, you're making them look good, because they can then go to their boss and say, you know, I've been thinking about that thing you were talking about, it's been on my mind, so I had research do this, and here's all the great things we came up with, here's the recommendations on what we think we're going to do. And then the 4th step in increasing your team's profile is see the big picture. And towards that, there's an expression someone at Discovery used to use that, as I've said before, when I see something I like that people do, I try to adopt it into my own best practices. And the expression this person had was, what, so what, and now what? Anyone here heard this expression before? A few of you? Okay. And I thought it was terrific the first time I heard it because I really thought it helps me see the big picture. And what it does for me, it puts together kind of a checklist that I should use every time I'm addressing any issue that comes up. So that this way I'm not just collecting facts and figures and handing them over to someone, but I'm going beyond that. And in fact, that's what the what stands for. The what is the data that you are putting together, all your facts and figures. So that is step one. But that's what I try to reaffirm with my team, is that you can't stop there. You can't just, if someone asks, how is something doing, you can't just say, oh, here's a bunch of data that shows you, and then walk out of their office. The next part is the so what. It's like, as we've been hearing quite a bit about the last few days, this is the part where you're providing the insights. So if, for example, you see that something is trending 10% up or is down 10%, that's the data, but that doesn't tell anyone why it's trending in either direction. So by stopping and saying, so what, it makes you think, okay, what is behind this trend, and how can I explain why this is happening? So by doing that, it reinforces and brings more value to the what. But even stopping there is not enough. That's where we get to the third step, which is the now what, which is basically short for, now that I know what is happening, what should I do next? And this is the part where, going back to the quote from Hamilton, helps us get into the room that I've been referring to, get into the room where it happens. Because if you can not only give someone insights, but bring to them the recommendations on how you think they can address the problem, they will see you. They will see that you bring them much more value, and hopefully invite you in much more often to when decisions are being made. So, as I was mentioning, there were 4 steps in terms of trying to get more of your particular team into where the decision makers are. So it was develop the role of collaborator, provide great customer experience, anticipate your customer needs, and then finally see the big picture by asking the question of what, now what, and what, so what, and now what. So with that, I'll now say, now what? Any questions?